Hello and welcome to ACFCS's inaugural interview series, Emerging Risks. We begin with a focus on the most pertinent headlines dominating our world today in March 2022. The Russian invasion of Ukraine. What does this mean for our FinCrime professionals working these issues? In particular, we're going to cover the recent sanctions against Russia. How will Russia answer? Will they utilize cryptocurrency to achieve their goals? And how long will they do this before the avenue to that is even permanently closed to them? To tackle these issues, and for our very first interview ever for this Emerging Risks series, we've brought on Ari Redboard, Head of Legal and Government Affairs for TRM Labs, a blockchain intelligence company. Ari, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. Honored to be your first guest in this series.
This is exciting. Let's just dig right into it. Some of these headlines include talk about tough sanctions against Russia. Can you describe what exactly is entailed in these sanctions?
Sure, absolutely. And staying sort of relatively high level here, really. Last Tuesday, a day or two before Russia invaded Ukraine, we started to see, the U.S. government, Europe, Canada, really across the globe, roll out sanctions. And they began with sort of sanctions against, certain Russian banks. And then what we've really seen is we've seen this steady drumbeat almost daily, I think actually daily, of sort of more and more sanctions. And they've gotten more serious each day in response to what's happening in Ukraine. And essentially what we are moving towards, and I'll kind of get back in a minute, but what we're moving towards is really a Iran or North Korea style, full sanctions program, to cut off Russia from the global financial system. And really what essentially that has meant so far is cutting off the top 10 Russian banks from correspondent banking, which means accessing the US dollar, essentially. It means attempting to block and freeze assets of the Russian central bank, which is a huge sanction. It is about potentially going after individuals like Vladimir Putin himself, his inner circle, and the elites that sort of are, dominate Russia in the political space. So what we're seeing already is this ratcheting up of sanctions. And what it really is it's closing in on the regime and putting maximum pressure on them. And at the end of the day, US sanctions, global sanctions are predicated on the status of the US dollar as the global reserve currency. That's where the power lies. And right now, the US dollar is still the global reserve currency, and cutting Russia off from that has significant impact.
So speaking of that, what kind of alternative methods are they going to use then if they're being cut off?
Yeah, so that's really sort of where we go from here, right? Look, if the US dollar is the global reserve currency, then Russian actors, designated individuals, Russian oligarchs need to find a way to circumvent the US financial system. And crypto is potentially an option for that. Now what's interesting here is, look, the entire, we're talking about $1.5 trillion in trade, $630 billion in central bank accounts globally, Russia's central bank accounts globally. I mean, there's not a world in which crypto, no matter how much you launder, no matter how much you attempt to sort of evade sanctions, can even come close. It's not even a drop in the bucket of what is ultimately what we're ultimately talking about in terms of sanctions here. So what we're going to see is we'll see Russia try to or Russian individuals try to use cryptocurrency to evade sanctions on the margins. And really sort of the question then from there is sort of, how do you do that?
That was my next question. How would you do that? Because is it in an exchange? Is it an individual looking at blockchain transactions on their own off chain? Can you explain that?
Yeah, no, for sure. So look, in order to access cryptocurrency, you need an on-ramp into the sort of onto the blockchain. And that's usually through an exchange. And then you also, at the end of the day, you need an off-ramp to more usable traditional currencies, fiat currencies, for lack of a better description. And those off-ramps tend to be exchanges, because the reality is today, you still can't buy bread and milk. You still cannot buy even, weapons, with exceptions. using cryptocurrency alone. So you need to off-ramp it to usable currency. So what you're looking at is exchanges. And your audience is extraordinary here because so many of them are, what I call tip of the spear today. They are at the front lines of stopping Russian actors, sanctioned entities, individuals from accessing cryptocurrency because they are compliance professionals at cryptocurrency exchanges. They're compliance professionals at large financial institutions. And their job is to stop this from happening. And I can tell you from my experience at TRM, large compliant exchanges are very good at compliance. They are required to and have robust compliance controls in place. They take a risk-based approach to compliance. That means they have policies and procedures in place. They have, as I said, excellent compliance professionals who are leading the charge here. They have transaction monitoring solutions and wallet screening like TRM Labs. They're licensed. They file SARs or suspicious activity reports or the equivalent with their global regulator. They have these controls in place, and these controls are there to stop sanctions evasion. So really, if not the large exchanges, where do sort of Russian sanctioned individuals go? And where they're going to go is this sort of illicit underbelly of the overwhelmingly licit crypto economy. For example, in September and November, Treasury OFAC designated SUEX, and then they designated ChatX. These were Russia-based exchanges that did not have compliance controls in place, did not do KYC, and they were sanctioned for facilitating ransom payments. But that was just because the focus of those actions was ransomware, because we were in the wake of ransomware attacks. It could just have been just as easily been for facilitating sanctions evasion or terrorist financing, because what it really means is just like, it doesn't matter what the illicit activity is, they don't have the compliance controls to stop illicit proceeds from flowing through their systems. So Russian actors will continue to look to exchanges like SUEX, exchanges like ChatX. What are the next SUEXs out there? Over the weekend, the TRM team has really been working like around the clock on this, and we identified about 340 Russian-related VASPs or virtual asset service providers that overwhelmingly, the vast majority of, do not have the appropriate compliance controls in place. Those will be the places where Russian actors will be looking to move funds, and these will be the places that Treasury and allies globally all over the world will be looking to go after to cut them off. But it's really important to note that, look, we're still talking about millions, tens of millions, even hundreds of millions potentially, nowhere near what it takes to properly evade sanctions, to replace what you're losing here. If you're Russia, this is again a drop in the bucket, compared to the penalties that they're facing right now.
The 340 you just mentioned, were you able to get on the phone, or your whole team has to work overnight, like you said, and contact all these exchanges to let them know? Are you in constant contact with law enforcement as well? Do you do both?
We essentially do both. We work really closely with law enforcement partners and regulators. But what we're really doing is what blockchain intelligence does is we take that raw blockchain data and we layer it with this sort of threat intelligence or this information. So what we're doing is we are identifying high-risk entities, high-risk VASPs or virtual asset service providers, and we are putting them into our tool. So our partners at large exchanges, at financial institutions, are able to identify those VASPs as high risk. So it's not so much calling every client, every partner in the space. They are able to see in real time in TRM how we are, attribution or information about those VASPs.
This is a really good illustration for our members who are from traditional finance, the TradFi portion of it, to try to understand how these intelligence companies as well as exchanges work together. And this is a perfect example. Did you find these 340, they'd always been there, or is it because did they pop up recently?
It's a mix. It's really a mix and really, really hard to say. I could just say that sort of look, at the end of the day, sort of you have this overwhelmingly growing illicit crypto ecosystem, and that really is where most of the liquidity is, right? These large exchanges. But you do see, look, I mean, these SUEX and ChatX are just great examples because there's a lot out there on them now. We've done a lot of reporting. We've seen a lot in the media, sort of what they were. And they were really sort of these over-the-counter brokers. They were what we call parasite VASPs. And what they did is they lived on the infrastructure of larger compliant exchanges to use the speed and liquidity of those exchanges, yet the exchanges themselves did not necessarily know that they were doing it.
Right.
There are OTC desks that do this totally in a totally appropriate way. There's a really important place in the ecosystem for these nested exchanges, legitimate nested exchanges. These parasite VASPs were not that. They were taking advantage of larger compliant VASPs, and we work with our clients, the larger compliant VASPs, oftentimes to be able to identify if there are parasite VASPs that are taking advantage of their ecosystem. I mean, super interesting stuff. And look, to me, these are really hard issues, and we're in a really, really high stakes moment. But I would say that, like, at the end of the day, I sleep at night because I know that the large compliant VASPs or exchanges, the Coinbases, the Binances, the FTXs of the world have the compliance teams in place to mitigate the risk. And that's where most of the liquidity is. And then I also know that law enforcement and regulators are going to continue to go after this sort of illicit underbelly, for lack of a better description, to ensure that Russian actors aren't able to move funds through those VASPs.
What a great marriage. Exchanges, your intelligence company, and law enforcement. That's wonderful. What can compliance professionals do in, say, the TradFi space as well as the DeFi space, and law enforcement to stop this?
Yeah, it's what they're doing. And what I understand, like, from friends and folks that I've spoken to for the last, several days, is like really understanding, all right, so what are the sanctions here? What has happened? You work with counsel, work with other folks to really understand sort of like what are your obligations? And then also just ensure that your compliance controls are in place and that you're taking a risk-based approach. You're filing your SARs. You're contacting law enforcement if it's something that's truly out of the ordinary and extraordinary. But quite honestly, it's like, it's what these people do every day and what they've been doing for a long time. I think the key is to really learn sort of like, what are the new sanctions? Who should we be worried about? And really follow closely, because this is something every day we're going to see more and more sanctions every day. And from the crypto space, we're going to start to see cryptocurrency addresses on the SDN list. And those are going to need to be, what we'll do is we'll take those immediately and ingest them into TRM. So you get alerts if you're an exchange, if you're going to transact with one of those sanctioned wallets. But you just need to know. And I think it's sort of really following what's going on, follow the advisories and guidance from FinCEN and OFAC more than ever, what the White House is announcing. Because, it's an incredibly high stakes moment for the world. But also in many respects for the crypto industry, because I think it's a moment to show that, like, the crypto industry has compliance controls in place to stop this sort of stuff.
So what you're saying is make sure you're staying up on headlines, as well as who is on these lists, making sure that you're adhering to the policies of your own institution, whether that be TradFi or DeFi, and that all three can work together is what you're saying.
Well said.
That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much to Ari. I know this is a quick interview, for being our inaugural emerging risk interviewee in this new content series. Ari, thank you so much. And thank you to all our viewers. Please check out the ACFCS website for additional interviews on the ever-evolving changing situation in Ukraine, as well as other timely topics we need to explore within the Emerging Risks interview series. Until then, keep up the good fight.
Hey, Aaron, thank you so much for having me.